Well, I think as far as I'm concerned and as far as the family's concerned, the most important thing that happened to us in Norwich was the birth of Tabitha. And we shall always remember Norwich with great affection because of that. When I came to Norwich, it was quite suddenly. I was on the president's list. I didn't have a proper appointment. And I was sent by the president. So that in fact the people at Norwich didn't invite me, which meant that they had to put up with me and I had to put up with them. But it was a very happy relationship that we had. We were happy in Norwich, and there I think my ministry took a turn for the better. One of the things I think I learned to do better was to preach. I had to preach more often in the same church than I'd ever had to do before, because before that I'd had lots of smaller churches and I could get away with 2 or 3 sermons a quarter. When I was at Park Lane almost every week, I had to preach and preach and preach, and that set me in good stead for this particular appointment here in Gants Hill, where I've done the same, and the pastorate to which I'm going in Douglas, where I will have to do the same again. I remember having to prepare week after week, and I remember at first it being a very heavy load indeed. But I do remember too at my farewell in Norwich, someone, whose name escapes me now, got up and said that he'd felt my preaching had improved in the time that I'd been there. So that was something. I brought that away with me. I remember Sundays being a very heavy day. I had a very heavy day because there was morning service, and then there would frequently be an afternoon service, perhaps at Mulbarton, and then there would be a tea time occasion at the chaplaincy, and then there would be an evening service, possibly at Park Lane, and then there would be spot sock afterwards. So by the end of a Sunday like that, I felt I needed Monday off. I was working particularly with the young people, of course, at Park Lane, so I was very involved with Spot Sock. I was very involved with the university young people and with the other chaplains who were there. And I think for me it was a good experience. It was an eye-opening experience, which helped me in my work with young people subsequently. I remember the teas we had at the manse. We used to invite members of the Methodist Society from the university, and indeed plenty of their friends too, to come round to the manse every now and again on a weekday for tea, where we could get to know the students. I remember trying to integrate the students into the life of Park Lane, and it wasn't always easy. It wasn't always easy to make that link between the church and the university. I remember too, when I was in Norwich, my country churches. It was something that perhaps the people at Park Lane weren't always aware of, but I did have Mulbarton and Barford. And in fact, only the other day, Peter, who is now almost 20, our oldest, Peter said, "Do you remember, Dad, when we went to that pig farm at one of your churches?" Because, of course, the steward at Barford kept pigs, and he was kind enough to show me, and at that time, my little boy, around his pig farm. And I do remember that we went back there after a Sunday morning service, and I actually went around the pig farm in my cassock. I still have the same cassock. I think it's probably time I got a new one. The Paddock Civic Youth Band visited Norwich when I was there, simply because a friend of mine from college, the Reverend Pearson Ireland, knew this band, and his son played in the band, and we made a link with Paddock in Yorkshire, and they came and gave us a marvellous time, marvellous day when they came to Norwich. Strangely enough, Pearson Ireland seems to be following me around, because while I've been in Gants Hill, he has been in Camden Town and Islington, not an enviable task, and we've invited him here to this church at Gants Hill on a few occasions. One of the few friendships that I've been able to maintain since I left college. I remember many people at Norwich. Some I remember by name, some I can picture quite vividly, but their names have disappeared in the mists of time. You have to remember that it was, in fact, 11 years ago that I was in Norwich. Someone has mentioned to me this afternoon Hilda Crow, and I remember Hilda very well. The thing I remember about Hilda most of all is that she read my palm. Now, Hilda, you never actually told me what you saw in my palm, and I'd be interested to compare notes with you to see if, in fact, it has already happened. I remember Bill Martin on the organ. I remember coming to Park Lane and being happy to have a good organist and to be able to conduct worship in a beautiful church, and in a church where perhaps my style of churchmanship was appreciated more than it had been in, say, some of the little country chapels I'd had in Yorkshire. I'll say no more. But for that reason, I enjoyed Park Lane, and I enjoyed conducting worship there. I certainly conducted a lot of weddings. When Rodham was there, he seemed to prefer that I should take most of the weddings, and I think that in that period, I learned the wedding service off by heart. I had one almost every Sunday. I didn't mind conducting the weddings. It was filling in the books afterwards that I didn't like doing. But I conducted many weddings at slip of the tongue there, Gants Hill. I'm looking back on that. I conducted many weddings at Park Lane, and remember many of the people who came through the marriage preparation groups. In fact, that's something that I initiated there, something that was possible because we did have so many couples coming to be married, most of whom had nothing to do with the church at all. And Heather and I would have a group in our home for 4 or 5 couples on a series of weeks before the wedding, so that we could talk with them about marriage and all that it might mean for them. So that was something that I learned and a way that I moved forward while I was in Norwich. Yes, I remember Rodham Dowson very well. He was a very efficient super, perhaps the most efficient super I'd had up to that point, and we got on very well. I shared a church with him, and when you can say that you got on well with someone you had to share a church with, I think that's quite something. I also got on very well with Bill Ream, who followed him. I was very impressed with Bill, a very quiet but good Christian man who was a great help to me in my years at Park Lane. And in fact, I still have a book, Bill, if you watch this video, on my study bookshelves, which you gave me when I left, and I still use it in my acts of worship. So I carry a lot of memories of people, and too many people really to mention. Although I was mainly responsible for young people at Park Lane, I did have responsibility for a number of older people in the congregation, partly because there were times when Rodham Dowson was away sick and I was carrying the load of the entire church. And at that time, I got to know quite a number of the older members of the church and was glad to do this because I didn't want a ministry exclusively to young people. And I remember many in my visiting. I remember many people that I visited in situations that were unhappy and difficult, in illness, in bereavement. I could say nothing about it on this tape because it was all entirely in confidence. But they will remember me, and I remember them with great affection. I think I feel now about them as I do about the 11 years of ministry here at Gants Hill, that I've not really had anything to give to anybody in these situations, except perhaps just being there. And I also feel that I have received as much as I have been able to give. And I certainly received a lot from the many people that I visited over the 6 years that I was at Park Lane. Among the names that came to my head was Len Sugden, because I remember Len Sugden saying to me when I was coming to East London, "We lived in the London area once," he said, "but we never went up to town more than 2 or 3 times in all the time we were there." And I thought, oh well, that's nonsense. I'm sure I shall avail myself of all the facilities of London while I'm there. Well, I have to tell you that I've been here 11 years now. I've only ever been to one show up in London, and that's when somebody from the church took us. And I go as rarely as possible because I absolutely hate the tube, so Bill Sugden was absolutely right. Well, although I don't go to London any more than I have to, I have been known to appear at Covent Garden with my Punch and Judy show, and this particular May, at the special service that is held in St. Paul's Church at Covent Garden, I was honoured to be asked to preach the sermon. Very pleased to be able to do this because it did give me the opportunity to be able to preach to a very, very varied congregation of non-Christians and semi-Christians, and I felt that it was an opportunity that was rarely given to a minister like me, so I seized it with both hands. I was particularly pleased with the way the press reported it because they did seem to get the gist of what I said almost right. That's quite unusual for the press, but I was very pleased about that. Yeah, Mr. Punch has appeared in the pulpit here, of course, since I've been here, but alas, he didn't play any part at Park Lane because I hadn't then taken up that rather unusual hobby. I don't know what the next one will be, but I've no doubt that Mr. Punch will go to Douglas with me. Because, well, I still have great connections with the circus. I suppose really Punch and Judy is only one step away from it. Yes, I still love the circus, and since I've been here, have helped on many shows that have come to this area. So, yes, I still have the love of the circus, still have my circus models, and I haven't changed that much.